Welcome on back, faithful, to another episode of Tough Love, Tough Talks. Tonight, I am joined by author, historian, Mr. Gary Wayne. Gary, welcome on back to the show, sir.
Well, thank you for inviting me back, and so happy to be with you and with your audience. And yeah, really looking forward to the show tonight.
As am I, as have I been for a bit now. Last time we were on, we really went down the rabbit hole on Atlantis and lots of really fun information
Yep.
there, lots of really cool conversation on the beast empires and even on Freemasonry and the serpent societies. So if you guys haven't seen that one, definitely pop on back and check that out. But tonight, we're going to be doing something a little bit different, and we've only got about a 2-hour window in which to do it, and we have a lot of questions to tackle. But that is going to be a Q&A. We are going to be trying to tackle as many questions as we can from the community, from you guys. We have been seeing a number of questions coming in, not just on our biggest video that you and I have done together, which was on the topic of just naming off all the Nephilim and Rephaim tribes in the Bible, but across a number of videos I've done, I've been seeing the same repeat questions again and again. I thought, who better to tackle those questions than the man behind two of the largest books on the topic, the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, books 1 and 2. So we are going to be tackling 16 questions tonight, folks. If you do have a question during the course of our talk, please, by all means, fire it off into the comment section here. If we have time at the end, we will try and get to as many of those as possible. All right, Gary, you ready for this one?
I am. I absolutely am. So,
all right. Well, the first question of the night comes from Randall Burgess, 6393. And that is, what are the facts concerning the beginnings of Halloween and its pagan worship? Is taking part in Halloween today inviting the powers of darkness into your life and the life of your family?
so yeah, the first thing to understand before I get into the history of Halloween is that this is a pagan polytheist holiday called Samhain, and it has ancient origins and more recent sort of incantations to it, but all in that same important kind of tradition. So, if people aren't aware of it, there are 8 Sabbaths around the year that's set in a wheel and based in the wheel circuit of pilgrimage and festivals. Um, that the polytheists celebrate and rooted back to the demigods and the giants, particularly from a post-Diluvian perspective, and with the gods probably even further back. So Samhain is the most holiest day of the year, the most important day. But it's not just a day. All Hallows Eve is on the 31st, but it extends right to November 11th, which is, of course, another important day where poppies are included, and you have the memorialization of the war heroes in World War One, as it was first put in on the 11th day at the 11th hour in the 11th month, which is something to think about, which is 33, as in the Scottish Rite adepthood, and one of the holy numbers, and 3, because there's 3 of them, which is the 3rd degree adept level, and that poppies go right back to Sumeria. To ancient history, where the gods would hold these dried things in this release, and it's like this bulb. This was the poppy, and it was very important in their rituals. And the traveling into the underworld was also very, very important. The same imagery shows up with post-Diluvian gods, like with Hades and Persephone, who would go at the beginning of Samhain on their trip to the underworld, to Hades, where they would stay there for a while. And so you can go back almost 6,000 years. The most common version, as we understand it, is the Irish tradition, for the most part, and the Scottish tradition, which was brought over by immigrants in the 18th century. in the 17th century. And, from that sort of point on, and became very popular in the late 1800s and early 1900s as the tradition sort of come about. And so they would not use a pumpkin for a jack-o'-lantern, but they would use a turnip over in.
I've heard that.
But pumpkins were more conducive to grow in North America and more easily grown. And so they became the jack-o'-lantern. And of course, Jack is a Nephilim. He's a jack of the lantern, and the mythology takes him back to, gianthood, and he is condemned to walk the earth with this lantern or turnip lantern as a demonic spirit, so a disembodied spirit of a giant. So as we start to look at this history moving forward and how it ends up over here, you have in about 43 AD, you have Rome, and this is at the start of the rise of Christianity, but it doesn't have a big influence on it yet because it's not that many years after Jesus has been crucified. And so Rome, in the power, it meshes their Day of the Dead celebration into the Samhain one. And they have another tradition that's more rooted in the Lupercalis festival and the dead as well, which is on St. Valentine's Day. But now they're going to sync it because of the empire. They want unity within the empire and within in the religion. So when we talk about 8 Sabbaths, I'll just give them, I won't give them all the names. I'll give you where they are, but we know them by the 2 equinoxes and the 2 solstices. So December 21 is Yule, for example. Samhain is Halloween. You have also every 6 weeks or in the middle, you have another celebration. So that's when we celebrate or mix in St. Valentine's Day is the first one. And then May Day is another one, and the May rituals. And then one at the end of August, and then Samhain, which is the 6 weeks after the equinox in September. So there's 8 of them, and it's in a wheel shape. And the religion of the giants was the circuit of the wheel. So when we see Gilgal Raphaim at the foot of Mount Hermon on the Golan Heights, Wheel of the Giants, Wheel of the Spirits, that was one of the major sites. And it goes back to before the flood, to maybe as early as 3500 BC. But there would be a circuit in a wheel. So that understanding of a pilgrimage in a circle is very, very important, just as judges would have a circuit and ministers would one time have a circuit. And just as a circuit was done even in ancient Israel amongst the rabbis and the priesthood, but from a monotheist perspective. And so a circle is very important in the occult. So you have the magic circle that most people might be familiar with. And so circles are drawn a lot in association with pentagrams in around Samhain as well. It's kind of representative as an allegorical portal. But also its true meaning is that it is a sacred location where you are going to be protected from the evil spirits. So you would do a circle, but you wouldn't draw it. You would have to put flour or blood or something to create the circle. And it is also a place where you would more easily communicate with fallen angels or demonic spirits, and more likely demonic spirits, because on All Hallows Eve, that's when you reduce the veil to almost nothing in their belief system between the physical world and the spiritual world, and these demonic spirits that manage to make it to their heaven in Hades or Sheol are going to come through all these portals on All Hallows Eve, and they're swarming everywhere.
Wow.
So if you're participating in a ritual during Samhain, you're opening yourself up. If you're getting drunk or doing drugs that might open yourselves up to a demon, you want to be very, very careful. So you want to understand that everything that is done is a polytheist ritual that they have Christians and people doing. And I'm not anti-Halloween. And people do what you want. Stay away from the rituals.
Sure.
So in the tradition as it was done in the time of the Druids in Ireland and Wales and England is they would go knocking on the doors, the Druids, on All Hallows Eve and looking for a treat. What a treat was is supply some of your servants to us. And what we will do is we will take them and we will put them in front of a vat of boiling water with apples in it or something. And they might have used other fruit as well. And they would have to try and get that apple out of the boiling water. And if they failed, they would be they would be killed and use their body used for fat to run the bonfires to keep the evil demons away. If they refused, they were taken and burnt like a wicker man, so that they would take again the fat to feed the bonfires. And so that was the trick of the treat, or as to what they were doing. But if the nobles refused, then they did blood circles and curses and all sorts of things in front of the house, along the house, to entice demons to go in and haunt them during Samhain.
Wow.
So now let's just look at the costumes that people dress up in. So the easy one is the fairy kings and the fairy queens, right? That's the matriarchal bloodline of the Tuatha De Danann giants, right? Let's look at people dressing up as demons. Well, that's the disembodied spirit, right? Let's look at wizards. Well, that's the priest of the priesthood and the priestess. Witches would be a priestess costume.
Of course.
Right? And you just can go all down. And if you're dressing up as a superhero, heroes of old were the offspring of the gods, and the human females, the demigods. So
men of renown.
Yeah, they're just giants. If you're a pirate, pirates are thought to be sponsored by the Knights Templar.
Oh my gosh, you can't get away from it.
Yeah, everything. Ghosts. I mean, another thing that is related to the disembodied spirits, crazy clowns, the trickster spirit of the crazy clowns. Crazy clowns were shamans. There's different kinds of shamans, but the connection is you have this white face, like with a shaman or a mime, but when you are putting this additional color on, you're not just representing Nephilim and their pale skin in particular. Now you're possessed, or they're doing something to change your body while they're in you. They're either enhancing you or they're torturing you. And so masks that are worn on Halloween, that comes up through the theatric side, along with kind of a parallel thing with the white faces. So you have this understanding that as an actor, you're channeling and trying to become the character. Well, that's demon possession. And that you're wearing a mask so that it's not you. And the mask is usually white in the ancient Greek and Roman tradition, in that same sort of tradition, but more obviously so in China and Southeast Asia, where those theater masks have all of those red marks and things, like the crazy clown. And so these are also priests that would wear these in the Western tradition versus the shaman. So when you have a court jester, that is a wizard or a priest of the occult for the king in the court, and he would wear these same type of colors. Now, if they gave bad, what they called sage Yes, as in a priest advice.
Wow.
They would take a knife. The king would take a knife which was his right and slit them from ear to ear. So now you put that slit on top of the white face and add a little bit more of the clown color, and you get the Joker in the Batman series. And Batman is an image of the Camazots, House of the Bat, demigods in the Popol Vuh. And if you Google Camazots, you get Batman's outfit. I kid you not. You can't make this up. There's so much stuff there. But the point of the matter is, we get immersed in it, so we're more easily accepting of it. So, and then you had, an adaptation of Christianity. I'll just finish up on this because I could do a whole show on Halloween.
For sure. Wow.
And I'm doing the show tomorrow again.
Awesome.
So in about 700 to 800 AD, Pope Gregory III, he moves All Saints Day to November the 1st. And then in about 1000 AD, it becomes All Souls Day on November the 2nd, but still within that same period. But what he's doing, he's having a celebration that is going to do things that are very similar to the polytheist side, and both of these two moves by the different popes. And so they're going to go door to door knocking on it and trying to get something. Would be get these soul cakes that they would give out.
Soul cakes.
And they would dress up like saints and things like that. So they're really doing the same kind of tradition. In other words, channeling what they would say as a polytheist spirit within the Christian hood, in terms of a lot of the popes, or the ones that they exonerate, the ideology would be is that those weren't really monotheists because bodies would be sleeping. So that's how it sort of gets intermeshed into and overlaid and kind of acceptable to do similar things during the same period.
Wow.
So the more it gets glorified and more it can be done out in the open, well, it's more fun to get even more full of intrigue with the characters and then the candy and this and that. But understand that even the jack-o'-lantern, I mean, that goes back to Tuatha De Danann with the name Jack, and Jack is a common term for a demon spirit, like a Jack in the Box. That's like this crazy clown that comes out of the box. And pirates are typically named Jack. A lot of them are. And so Jack Frost is another one, demon spirit in a snowman.
Wow. It's so interesting when you think about the imagery throughout storytelling that's used for jack-o'-lanterns, because even the story of Ichabod Crane, they have this horseman. He's wielding pumpkins at him.
Yeah. Well, and why is he headless? Because if you wanted to kill a giant, you had to take the head off.
So you brought up something interesting too, with how it's either trick or treat. So it's sort of like a, hey, give us a treat, or on you we're going to play a trick. Like that's the whole.
Yes, blackmail.
Give us your service.
Extortion.
Well, and you think about people bobbing for apples. It's like this is done in remembrance of these poor servants putting their hand in boiling water.
Yeah. So, anyways, we spent that's probably the longest answer I'll spend on it, but Halloween is a very large topic, and so we want to be careful with it. We don't want to do rituals, and we don't want to create opportunities to invite a demon spirit in, particularly when there's so many that are said to be out in that period of time. And I have no reason to doubt them. They control this world.
Sure. Now, then, would you think, I guess, as an addendum to that, when, say, a kid dresses up as like Batman or Superman or Steve from Minecraft and goes out to gather candy, do you think that that is an invitation for that person to be oppressed by demons?
Yes, what you want to be careful of is getting too much into the character.
Okay. So like trying to like over embody the character versus like, hey, I'm
just having fun.
Sure.
Right. But if you want to become the character, are you creating an invitation?
Got you. Good to know out there, folks. Sometimes it's not just about candy.
Yeah. So, choose something that is not important or directly related to the giants and the demigods. But this is a demigod festival. This is a giant festival, and all about their history, genealogy, and belief system.
Wow. It makes me think of that scene towards the end of the first Ghostbusters movie where they crack the hatch on that container and it's just like everything comes swirling out. And happy Halloween, folks. All right. Excellent. Well, there's one tackled, folks. Moving right along. Question number 2 comes from Doc Larson 44. Is there any relationship between Sasquatch and Nephilim?
I think there definitely is. And so the Sasquatch overlap into having some sort of connection with aliens. There seems to be association there. And they're definitely related to the little people. So that's a very interesting being, but they're not giants like the Nephilim. But yet they seem to be intelligent beings. So I think they're part of the greater Nephilim concept, and we'll be talking more about that because, elves and fairies and things are also part of the costumes, and that's the elementals. That there's another question coming down the road, so I won't spend too much time there right now. And so when we look at them as part of a greater Nephilim concept, a similar type of creation, but something different or unique, and they may not have as much human component in them, but they definitely have intelligence, and we know that, and they have a tapping language that they can use, and they make sounds, but they're not as high up on the visible hierarchy if indeed they are one of those Nephilim creatures. And the Nephilim would be, and the Rephaim would be at the top of the visible ones, and the Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, it's the same tradition all around the world, just different names, both before and after the flood. So it's been with us all throughout our history, like the little ones. And so they have glowing eyes. Well, the giants were known as the shining ones because their eyes would light up a whole room.
Wow.
So there's a connection there. And the eyes of the Bigfoot are like amber and red and white, and sometimes an orangey blue. That's what I'm told. I've not seen any, so I'm only doing research on it. And so again, we have hazel eyes is your typical color for the giant eyes, or blue eyes, or these really dark brown eyes. So something a little bit different, but it's the eyes that are shining. And so they live in caves a lot, and a lot of the giants lived in caves. Biblically, we look at the Horim as cave dwellers and hairy, and Bigfoot is very, very hairy. So again, another similarity. So if we look at, and you could also look at the understanding that underground cities might have been built by Nephilim before the flood and the technology, and maybe again after the flood. So maybe they're escaping in there, because with the caves, you get a connection into portals. Just as you have, let's say, for a quick example, you have the gateway to Hades at the foot of Mount Hermon that Baal would go back and forth while he was the offspring god after the flood, for as long as he remained outside the pit prison, because he did the same crime. So he went there as well shortly after the flood, but he would go back and forth. And so that's another, circle kind of has that imagery of that portal that we were talking about, or a mirror that is thought to be another portal, and a fairy dolmen, like a mini Stonehenge, is another portal. And so it's these kinds of portals all around the world that on Halloween the demon spirits would come through. So now, how would we get there? Well, there's an interesting thing when we look at the word demigod. It's from the Indo-Aryan language of the giants, and it was semi-deus, and it's half god. So semi-divine is another term that we would have in English for it, or demigod, half god, half human, as they were understood in ancientology. And so that's how it's generally thought. But we get something a little bit different with Gilgamesh, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the son of King Lugalbanda and the fertility goddess Nin, who's a bull god, and Gilgamesh is called a bull, and so is Lugalbanda a bull, because the bulls were the giants and the gods. And so the bulls of Bashan, as in Baal's a bull, the Ugaritic text Rephaim are bulls. The bulls of Bashan that are taunting Jesus on the cross in the book of Psalms are the demonic spirits and the fallen angels.
Wow.
So now, as we move forward on this understanding, they are 2/3 God, 1/3 human. So one could make the case here that Lugalbanda, meaning large man or giant king of Baruch, and a hero as well, he was already a giant, and so already sort of demigod. So maybe that demigod aspect makes it 1/3 human and 2/3 God. I don't know. Maybe there's another type of union there that would do that, or there's something else going on. Maybe some DNA manipulation from animals or whatever like that. Because you also have to provide the intelligence and a spirit that's going to be able to live in that with the counterfeit spirit, like with the Nephilim. That comes from the fallen angels. Okay, so now if you're still with me on all of that, just laying that down, like there may be different mixes in terms of the angelic technology than what they can do. Then if we look at some gods in some different pantheons, we get an ape god that's in the Indian pantheon, and that is Hanuman. And then you get some monkey gods like Wukong in the Chinese, which are Tengu, which is a form of a watcher, as we understand that, as we bring that out of China. And then you also have in the Gnostic book, the secret book to John, a god named Adonine, which had an ape face as well. So it could be from a god who had an ape or a monkey face, because you get that sort of relationship. But you also get in another Gnostic gospel, and this one is really interesting. It's called Pistis Sophia, and in it, in a chapter, book 4, chapter 126, and I always keep it handy because it's just it's got so much in it. And it's got these watchers, these archons that are in the pit prison. So this is a polytheist doctrine, polytheist gospel, testifying to watchers in the pit prison. So typically we're going to get ones like, serpent faces, because you have seraphim. So they're in there, but there's different looking ones like a bull's face. And you get another one that's like a lion's face or a cat's face. While on a cherubim, you have a human face, a bull face, a lion face, and a bird face. And so you have one that's in there that is named Luchar, Luchar, and he has a bear's face. So if we were to say, okay, well, but that's a Gnostic gospel, even though they're talking about the watchers that are in the pit prison, that polytheism doesn't like to recognize that those fallen angels would have been punished for the crimes that they did, and those same ones who brought the flood in polytheist traditions, even though they call the God of the Bible the evil one for bringing the flood. Having said all of that, we understand, and in book 2, I cover up the hierarchy of the angels, and we don't get definitions with faces to all of them. We can figure out what an Ophanim is. We can figure out what cherubim are, seraphim, and archangel, and at the lowest rank, just the angels. But we don't know what giants in between those two areas look like in the other levels. And so when we have Dunamis, and we have Excusia and Icarus and Cartacci and all of those other names for these different ranks, we get them translated as mighty angels, we get them translated as power, the powers and angels, arche as principalities, but we don't get descriptions of them. but they had to look like something if all the
Sure.
other angels look like something. So there's a possibility other watchers created other types of beings, but they're either maybe in lower in rank and therefore had to do a lower level of creature, like the little elementals and or things like the Bigfoot. But they are intelligent and they're associated in the cult and part of the whole history of polytheism. It's not just a more recent thing. Oh, and by the way, there's also a dog face watcher in there as well.
Dogmen, yeah.
Dogmen. And what's interesting is Anubis is a jackal god. Biblically, Nebaz is a dog-headed god the Avim worshipped in the Mesopotamian region, just as in that same region they worship Nergal, a lion-faced god, lion men of Moab and Irmhalu and creatures like that. So it starts to make sense that there could be a mixing in of animals in here, and they may have a lower percentage of the god that goes into that mix that creates these beings. And so I would say there's a greater Nephilim umbrella group of beings, but as you go down through the hierarchy, the elementals would be at the bottom and you would put the Nephilim at the top.
Far out. It's man, it's so hard, like I said already, to get away from all the connections that are inside there, especially when it's those really specific descriptions of like the dog face, the lion
Yeah.
face, the bear face.
Yeah.
Wow. There's actually a couple of YouTube channels that I have followed for a while. One of them is The Facts by How to Hunt, and a lot of the descriptions on there are almost across the board the same, where they describe the eyes, the glowing eyes. They even describe the smells that these things give off.
Oh, that's the other thing. They have a smell like sulfur or rotting skin or garbage. There's, but so did the Nephilim. So another connection that way. And so that means that they are probably using technology or everything they can to keep that body alive for as long as it can or longer than it should be. And I think maybe that's when it crosses into that decay stage. And remember, life was limited to 120 years in Genesis 6:3 in the giant creation story in the Bible.
Wow, this, like, I don't know if you've seen the anime Full Metal Alchemist, but this smacks of the chimeras inside there that are sort of they're just these husks that are kind of rotting away.
Yeah,
Wow.
and Chimera is that DNA technology I'm talking about that they call today the DNA manipulation Chimera. And it comes out of Greek history. So like King Hababa of the Cedar Forest in the Epic of Gilgamesh, he has multiple animal parts to him. Wow. And he's a giant and a creator of the gods, creation from the gods, and a terrible one.
I wonder too at the overall hairiness, because when we get a description of Esau inside Genesis, he's described as being so hairy that when Jacob puts on fur on his arms, his father can't discern, oh yeah, this is either Jacob or Esau. Like, no, I know this is Esau. Like, how hairy was this dude? Was he like, are these descended possibly from a lineage that he was tied into?
Well, we don't get a lineage that would come from, but he was definitely giant-like, maybe not as tall, but he was a hunter, right, as opposed to more the agrarian. And he also was described as ruddy, just as Nephilim and Rephaim are described as ruddy in terms of the skin color. So he very much took on that persona and then acted like one.
Interesting stuff. Oh man, this is I hope you folks out there are enjoying this as much as I am. All right, that one's soundly handled. Jumping into question 3 now. This one comes from Magic Wolf. Have you heard of the Codex Vaticanus, where the Apostle John, instead of seeing 666 on the foreheads of those who worship the beast, instead sees in the name of Allah?
Yeah, I'm kind of familiar with it. I can't say that I've studied it. I've done, some preliminary research on a lot of the Gnostic Gospels and stuff all around the world. So this one is a little bit interesting. I wasn't aware of that passage, and so I haven't looked that up, and I don't have that on my back shelves. So originally, it's a Latin translation in about the 4th century, and then it gets sort of revised so it's a fairly old manuscript, right? Except that you get revisions as late as the 1400s on it. So the original Vaticanus didn't have the Book of Maccabees in it like the original KJV had, and maybe a couple other ones, but it was almost a complete Old Testament text. But it was missing parts of the book of Hebrews. It was missing Second Timothy. It was missing Titus and Philemon. And those weren't put in as far as I'm aware. Maybe after that they were put in. And it didn't include the book of Revelation until the 1400s. And then that was added into it. So that's what I know about it. So when I look at that, I see the rise of the Ottoman Empire. I see the rise, the Crusades. I see the whole Islamic background and the, perpetual all-out war between Europe and Christianity and the Muslims. And I can see this as being a translation sort of overlay, an interpretive translation to put Allah on there. To me, that would make sense now. And then you have the beheading, which was still popular all throughout the Middle East. And it is even today is used by certain segments of Islam to deal with their enemies. And so Allah, though, well, you want to be a little bit careful with that word Allah, though, because if we look at the word El, as in a god or an angel, and with a capital E in the superlative sense, the singular form for God, El Elyon, God the Most High. It has a transliteration into other languages, as in, Aramaic and other languages. And so you have in Sumeria, it could be an IL or ILU in the Mesopotamian region. It could also be an AL, as in Baal, which means Lord God or Master God, right? So you see how that's starting to sort of shape up. Now, in the Bible, and there's examples throughout in Daniel 11, where the God of fortresses that Antichrist is going to worship, that God there isn't El or Elohim, it's Eloah, ends in an AH. Now, what's interesting about that's the feminine format, the feminine plural format, or Eloah is the feminine, struggling with that word today. It's the feminine plural format of Elohim, which is the male format with the I am. So it can be used to describe a goddess, if you wanted to do it that way, because of the female aspect. But typically, the AH is used in these types of words as in the action of the all-powerful God in this case. So what would be a classic example of that? Gibberim is a mighty one, plural. And so you can also use the word one and in plural ones to understand it. So Nephilim are the giant ones, Seraphim are the serpent-faced angel ones, words like that as you do the I am plural. And so like Rapha or Anakim would be the long-necked ones, right? So when we look at that understanding, the female form of Gibberim is Gibberah for the plural. And it's used throughout the Bible, not as a god or a goddess, but you could do that if you wanted to. But it's used to show the strength being applied. It's like an action. It's like a verb to it. So when it's used, it can be also used for, it's Geberah, it's a war god. It's a military god that he's honoring, the goddess of fortresses, right? Or the god of fortresses. And so when you have the AH format, it's used to describe the might of God or the might of angels, or that's how it's to be sort of understood. So now you have Allah, which would be a transliteration of Eloah. Now, is that a male goddess, or is that a female? Is that a female goddess, or is that a male god? Or is it just God and the power of God being applied, which is the God that they worship, and their use for the God of the Bible that it doesn't matter what we think, but what they say is that they worship the God of the Bible. So I understand it's also a generic term in the lowercase that could be a polytheist god in some pantheons, and it is, and a moon god and a moon goddess. But understand that moon that Islam has adopted came after the taking of Constantinople, a Christian location that venerated the part moon, and they adopted that after taking it into their iconology. So we want to be careful with those aspects of it, but understand that I understand why somebody in the 1400s would translate 666 as Allah, because it really is the power of Satan being as the avatar, acting through the avatar Antichrist in the end time.
Wow. And go figure the AH there being feminine, because
you can also hear, I know this is a little bit off topic, and these were the longest answers for the show, so we'll get through the other ones quickly. So when you hear the feminine format that people will like say the Holy Spirit is within Christianity, they're getting that from the word chakma for wisdom in Hebrew, as it's used. And so in Proverbs 8, where it's being used, it also has the singular form of chakam, Chakam. So you have both of those being used, but the people are trying to manipulate a gender into the Holy Spirit will say, well, because it's using the AH female plural suffix, Holy Spirit is a female. Well, Holy Spirit is a spirit. There's no gender to the spirit. So we want to be careful. And the wisdom is something that's being applied. It's the action that's being applied there. But then they double down in the New Testament on it, and they say, well, the word wisdom in the New Testament is Sophia, another mother goddess. Be careful of those things that people will lead them in. And Sophia was the one in Gnosticism who was the goddess of wisdom, and the partner of this nebulous life force that created the 12 archons that they say the God of the Bible was part of.
Wow.
So, wow. Yeah, they're skilled in their arguments. So, and Christians are starting to fall into that and expecting, if we're in the fig tree generation, we're going to see a resurgence of the goddess. And so that's going to be partly how they deceive Christians into coming into the universal religion.
Yeah, I've seen plenty of people out there trying to make an argument that the Queen of Heaven is Mary, and they use Catholicism to make that claim. However, we pretty well know that to be Ishtar or Astarte.
Yep. Yeah, and we do get the Queen of Heaven that is being worshipped in the book of Jeremiah, but that's a polytheist worship. So Queen of Heaven are mother goddesses, fertility goddess, both before and after the flood, so offspring gods and parent gods. So you would have Isis as a Queen of Heaven,
sure,
Inanna is a Queen of Heaven, Ashtaroth is a Queen of Heaven, and Nat is a Queen of Heaven. And I use those latter two because they take you back to the Bible with Baal and El. El is the parent god before the flood, father of Baal. Ashtaroth was his consort, and Anat was Baal's consort for the Baalim after the flood.
Man, with the capricious nature of Allah all throughout the Quran, wouldn't surprise me if it was a feminine spirit there.
Yep.
Little joke on the girls.
Yep.
All right. Soundly handled another one there. On to question 4, folks. From Bev 1618. There is a movement going around saying that the Jews in Israel right now are not really the true Israelites, God's chosen people. Can you please explain if this is true and who the true Israelites are? And does this matter since the Bible says that as believers, we are grafted in?
Yeah, so we want to be careful with that. And we want to be careful both ways with it. So here's what we know is that people will say that the Edomites are replaced the Jewish people, or the Khazars, which are the Edomites, replace the people. So they get there through a polytheist side, They don't know that they're repeating polytheist doctrine here, but Khazars are Khazarians that were a division of the Scythian Tuath giants, or Tuatha De Danann, where some of the Jewish people went and lived amongst. So would there be some intermarriage in there? Fine, absolutely. Tuatha De Danann are typically blonde-haired and red-haired giants, and Horim, who lived in the Seir region, were red-haired giants, and the Amalekim and the Anakim, which lived adjacent to the Horim, were blonde-haired giants. So those are kind of the mix of the Edomites as they come downstream, and so they could be these Khazar Scythians that Jewish people intermarried with, but Jewish people also settled elsewhere in the world. So could there be a large number of Jewish people today that aren't, in fact, part of the original Israelite nation? Sure. Could they be 80%? Sure. Could they be 90%? Sure. But here's what we do know is that they're not 100%. And the current nation state of Israel isn't 100% polytheist, and isn't a replacement or an anti-Israel, as in replacement, group of people. There is a remnant God will fight for in the covenant land in the end time, beginning in the war of Ezekiel 38 and 39, just before the midpoint of the last 7 years. And then we will have the people in Judea at the time of the abomination at the midpoint understand who Antichrist is, and then will flee to the wilderness. This is the midpoint, just as you see Satan with this great river that's also talked about in Isaiah. I won't go through all of these prophecies. They're trying to destroy Israel, or Judea, as we would understand the southern kingdom, and understand there's a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom, and the northern kingdom was lost into the Gentile nations. So it's just the visible southern kingdom of Judea that we're talking about today. That's back in the land of the fig tree, the southern kingdom, in time for the fig tree generation. You have God protecting them from Satan and Antichrist trying to destroy them from the face of the earth. And so you also have lost Israel, who are going to be awakened and called by name in the end time, probably by the 144,000. The firstborn, as the Old Testament says, he reserved the firstborn for himself. So that's probably where the 144,000 come from. Just like the two witnesses have to suffer the first death, and the 144,000 are seen in the throne room in Revelation 14 at the midpoint, just before the angel preaches the last of the gospel that the two witnesses and the 144,000 have taught. So everything is as Jesus said it would be in this oration before in Matthew 24, before the abomination and the crowning of Antichrist coming to power. So God will then will have Israel, awakened Israel, broken out of the prisons by the breaker, Jehovah of the Elohim, the word logos of the God Theos, and King David and 7 shepherds, and lead them in the great second Exodus to join the Judean people in the wilderness to be reconciled, judged, and their resurrections at that time as separate resurrections in Ezekiel 37. If you go through that passage, that's a resurrection sequence that Daniel 12 is talking about, because it's referring to the Judaic Israelite people, that prophecy of that judgment and resurrection. And then you also have second Exodus being talked about, where the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom will be brought into one stick. And this is before the Gog War. I mean, this is the Gog War is before that second Exodus, as Ezekiel 39, which is the second passage or second chapter to the Gog War. The second Exodus comes after the masses of Gog have been buried in the land of the covenant. So the timing sort of hits up. So God will remember his covenant as he promised in the Holy Covenant. And we are taught by Paul in Romans 11, that's being referenced here, is to don't deceive ourselves. Don't use our hubris here because they've had a temporary hardening of the heart, so the full number of the Gentiles can be brought back in. So there is a remnant that's still out there, however many that there are, and they have their own prophetic path through the end time versus the Christians, and we should be careful not to mix up prophecies to Judah, to Israel, and to the Christian church, which you get the Christian church prophecies in the New Testament. And thus, Jesus is the light to the Gentiles, because that's the way it's supposed to work out.
I have that same contention when you have people that try and claim a promise that was specifically spoken to Israel in the Old
Yep.
Testament as though it's one you can lay claim to today.
Yeah.
You always have to take those in context. I always tell people go 10 verses before, 10 verses after if you
Yes.
can, because a lot of times those promises, they were spoken just to Israel, or they're spoken to the church, or both.
Yes. You have to distinguish between that. Otherwise, your chronology is going to get all mixed up in prophecy.
Yeah, 100%. Excellent. Moving right along here, folks. Question number 5 comes to us from Green Ridge 91. What are fairies? If they exist, from what do they exist? Where did or do they come from? And what, if any, impact do they have on our world?
Right. So in the occult world, these are creations of the gods again. These are part of the visible hierarchy versus the invisible hierarchy, which is the council of the gods. Now, you could include demons as being, right below them as the disembodied spirits of the giants, as part of the invisible ones, because they don't have bodies anymore. But they are working on creating new bodies for them so they can have that dwelling place for their spirit and the soul and the body. And we'll probably see that in the end times. So these are a Nephilim-like creature, but just created a little bit differently. There are 4 groups of elementals, as they're called, and they're the lowest level according to the occult. And they're physical beings. They can be changelings, so they have attributes and powers, just like the Nephilim had additional powers that were passed on from the fallen angels. And so you have mischievous ones that are like leprechauns and pixies and brownies and the Menuhe in Hawaii, and they're all around the world, or the Laurel people in some of the First Nations. You have the good-looking ones, which are commonly known as the little people, but all of these are kind of little people as part of the first 3 groups of the elementals. So you would have Neroids, sprites, mermaids. I don't really put mermaids in there. I think that's a different classification, but part of the occult puts them in there. Mermaids are more closer to the sirens that are talked about in the Book of Enoch. So you have the elves, but these are the dark elves, not the white elves. The white elves are giants, Tuatha Dé Danann, and that's why you have them shown as bigger and more noble in the Lord of the Rings versus the hobbits and the dwarves and the other ones that are in there. And these are the ugly ones, like the gnomes, right? And they're all part of the hierarchy. Like the dwarves would make the weapons for the demigods in the earth, just as they're depicted in the Lord of the Rings in the mountains. And so these are the 3 groups of elementals that work as part of the world. And then there's one other group that is, and they all have part as their allegory. One is wind, one is fire, one is earth, one is air, as the 4 elementals. The 4th group is the salamanders, which are reptilians, and they are larger than humans. And we typically sort of see them in the alien mythos underground. But wherever they are higher than the little ones, and they're a little bit higher up in the hierarchy. So I don't know where these ones come from. The only thing I get biblically that would fit them is this: maybe somehow, some way, the fallen angels saved some of the Nahash serpents. And in the Gnostics, they were taller than humans. They're the size of a camel in terms of height, which sort of fits that description perfectly as a serpentine intelligent being, that just as fallen angels were able to either reproduce and or save some of the giants to survive the flood, or both, this may have happened with the Nahash as well. And same with the little people. You could, same way, because they show up both before and after the flood as well, just like the Bigfoot does. So same sort of understanding here. So biblically, we need to understand this because they're part of the spurious ones, the spurious offspring, and that they're here to run the world with the descendants of the giants. That answers to the council of the gods that rules over the 70 nations. And so they provide knowledge and stuff. So they're in technology. And biblically, we get a term in Greek called stoichia. And it's a word that is translated as rudiments and elements. So in Galatians 4:3 and 4:9, we get elements. And in 4:3, it says we're in bondage under the elements of the world.
Interesting.
And in 4:9, it's talking about the beggarly elements whereunto you desire to be in bondage. And the other passages are for rudiments is 2 Colossians 2:8 and 20 in principalities, where it's translated in 5 in I'm not sure what passage that one's off the top of my head. I've lost that one for a second. But anyways, these are elements can be translated as these type of beings that keep us in bondage, or the other passage where you'll see elements, it's just going to be elements of the universe, of the physical universe, the basic element. So we're told about these elementals in the Bible that help to keep us in bondage. They're working with the other visible ones for the council of the gods.
Wow. I don't know if you've seen it. Eli Marzulli has a very interesting video out where he visits this lab, and this guy is in supposed possession of a very small fairy, this little winged creature. I think he's got it in a jar of formaldehyde, I believe, just to preserve it. And they took some clippings from the wings there, and I haven't gotten to see if anything's come of it, but they were trying to get at the DNA. And if I remember correctly, in the video that he had put out, the DNA was of a certain percentage human, and then there was just this code that they've never seen exist in nature in any animal that we know of.
Well, that's what you get with Bigfoot as well.
Sure, I
of human mixing in there as they get into some of the DNA. It was Hebrews 5:12 is where where stoichia was translated as principles. So yeah, we need to be aware of this, and that there's a connection between all of this and the alien mythos. So the gnomes, which are ugly ones, controlled flying machines, technology, genealogies in that hierarchy. And they would use these UAPs to come through fairy domens or portals, kidnap people. And I put 2 of those kidnappings from 100 or a couple hundred years ago and 400 years ago, and it's been a tradition that comes down through our history, into book 1. And if you didn't know it was a fairy abduction, you'd swear it was a gray alien abduction, because they're described exactly the same and do the same things. And then of course you got the reptilians and the alien mythos. So they're going to create this alien mythos so that angels can walk amongst us and all of the spirit's offspring can walk amongst us in the end time.
Man, truth is stranger than fiction there, folks.
Very it always is, isn't it?
It seriously is. Wow. Excellent. Well, moving right along here. Question number 6 from Prisoner of Hope 8. How can a normal-sized human woman give birth to a giant baby without being destroyed in the birthing process? Were these huge hybrid offspring taken by cesarean section? And did many of the human women die in childbirth? Were hybrid females large enough to carry and deliver their offspring to full-term delivery without trauma?
Well, if you're a human and you're delivering a giant baby, whether it's the offspring of the gods or a giant impregnating a human, it's the same issue with the baby. I mean, you can say an angel can take a smaller size as a changeling, but the baby is still going to be born quickly according to the tradition and born walking, and would be very quickly too big for the humans. So Let's tackle that one first. So in the Kebra Nagast, which is the Ethiopian version of the Old Testament that they said they received down through the Queen of Sheba from Solomon, they have the antediluvian women dying in a ritual of like a Caesarean birth. And so they would cut the bellies open and the women's die, and these become, because of what they did and the willfulness to participate in the violation of the laws of creation, to create demigods, physical and immortal spirits in the physical world, they become sirens that the book of Enoch talks about.
I was going to bring that up. Okay, awesome.
Yeah, and where the mermaid thing is connected into that same mythos. So that's why I kind of say they're a little bit different than the elementals. So now, getting back on topic again, because we could go crazy on that for a while, but we'll try to stay focused. So one presumes that females who would have mated with Nephilim before the flood and females that would have mated with gods and or giants after the flood would have the same issue. Now, in terms of how so the women's would all die. The women would all die. Now, you also have the issue of the size of the male component to deliver the semen. So what we see in the Middle East are these rituals where there is semen that is being poured into women from a vial.
Whoa.
So one deduces is that's how they got around that, likely with the giants. Gods, if they wanted to keep their size, they would have to do that too, one would think. So so that's one way you would create babies, but the women are still going to die, right? Well, here's the other thing, though, is that we don't talk about this from a biblical basis, female giants, very often. And there were female giants that were born in other cultures, and like the Titanides that they're called in Greek mythology. And so they would have been able to produce babies easier because they'd be the same size as the giants. So that would be how you would say they would have done it, before the flood, and maybe and to a certain degree after the flood. So the question gets to be: is biblically, can we make a case for giant females? And the answer is yes, we can. And that's why Genesis 36 is so important, because it's not part of the Table of Nations in Genesis 10 or First Chronicles. But we need this information to make sense of what's going on in the Bible, because you get other genealogies in there. So the Horim are the ones who are the dukes of Edom that are going to intermarry with Esau and the Edomites. And so Esau is going to marry Oholibama, a Horim, giant. And Eliphaz is going to marry Timnah, also daughter of Seir, the chief of the Horim in the Seir region, whom Seir is named after. And Seir goes back to, you're going to love this, the Hebrew word satir.
Old goat man.
Old goat man. And of course, they were hairy too. So, and so this would be a pure blood female, and pure blood and females were one of the issues after the flood versus before the flood, where their fertility issue to reproduce issues, which becomes problematic, is not through the ovaries or the semen. They just can't produce enough females. So God has done something to restrict how the giants reproduce versus how they're able to reproduce in huge numbers. And in the Greek versions, there was more giants than humans at one time. That's how much they could reproduce. If you just using the polytheist account, but it sort of fits. And so Timnah, they create the hybrid Amalekites, right? So now if you have two humans intermarrying with giants, you don't have any of these issues in terms of size for the act or the baby being delivered. So those are the two main ways that you would have giants being born before and after the flood.
Wow. I after reading that section in your book where you talk about that birthing process a little bit and what happened to these women, I always pictured like the movie Alien, like a xenomorph just
Yeah.
kind of out of the stomach there.
Yeah, and again, that's an allegory for what they're talking about. I mean, look at this. Look at that cone head on the alien.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um,
And
wow,
it didn't take long to go through that pregnancy, which is another allegory reflecting their history. And of
it's
course,
really
aliens are part of the whole physical disguise and physical mythos of the offspring of the fallen angels. So yeah, of course it's going to fit.
when you look
And
at the artist behind the xenomorph, his art and
the
what is very, very clear demonic influence inside there, it's like they're all but telling you, this is what happened, folks. This is how it
yep,
all took place.
yep, yep.
Wow. There is an interesting thought process that Timothy Alberino supplies also for how you could have a human woman giving birth to this giant without dying. And he posited that there could be possibly the child be born of small size, but being that it had this angel DNA within it, it just grew very rapidly.
That
But you
that's
mentioned,
that's a possibility as well. We don't get any accounts of that, whether it's monotheistically or polytheistically, but it's a sound theory.
yeah. Now, what was you mentioned the tome? It was Tebran Nagast. Was that what it was?
The Kebra,
Kebra.
Kebra Nagast,
Kebra Nagast. I'll
N
have to look that up.
Negast. You can get copies of that. I have them, but sometimes they're split up. But yeah, it should be available, but you'll have to do some looking to get it.
Gotcha. Very good. Check that one out, folks. Um, Excellent. On to question 7 from Schultzton Clodiger. How could the male Nephilim, being the giants as described, with corresponding proportions of anatomy, copulate with normal sized biblical women of that time? I think we pretty well
We
just
covered
answered that.
that. Yep.
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 Moving on here. Question 8. In the
Oh,
end.
and
Oh, yeah.
I was just going to say before we move on. So
Mhm.
with the Canaanites, we get another example within the Table of Nations where males are going to intermarry with female giants, just as like Nimrod likely did to create those bloodlines. So we have 9 patriarchless tribes in the Table of Nations: the Amorites, the Jebusites. So daughters of Canaan, daughters of Heth, daughters of Sidon would have intermarried with Rephaim patriarchs. And we know Rephaim patriarchs aren't listed in the Table of Nations, just like those patriarchs in Genesis 36 weren't, because Rapha for the Rephaim in Genesis 14 and 15 as a tribe, and also generic for giant, is not listed as the patriarch in the Table of Nations. And Arba, the patriarch listed in the book of Joshua, um, for the Anakim, isn't listed in the Table of Nations. And so the Amorites would have been from probably a name like Amur that shows up in the Ugaritic text. And Amur is both a Baalim and a giant. There's the offspring of Amur. And of course, Amorite goes back to Amorai, which is very similar to Amur in the spellings, or a name very, very close to that, and would have received their names eponymously from the Rephaim patriarch.
Far out, far out. I think I want to say Josephus did a little bit of writing on some of those other lineages.
Yep.
I remember, I forget which book of his it is, but he talks specifically about the lineage of Ham. I found that to be very interesting as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Josephus did some very good work.
Alrighty, question number 8. Roxanne Abbott, 8424, asks, in the end times, do we bring back the Rephaim to this earth? And is the beast that heals his head wound in Revelation a Nephilim?
So good questions. I think we want to be careful to try and utilize biblical passages to bring back giants in the end time. It's inferred possibly as in the days of Noah. We don't really have true passages that would suggest that we do, except that nothing new is under the sun. So, but we're still speculating to a certain degree. Some people will use Isaiah 13 to suggest that there's giants, but these don't really fit here unless they're loyal giants. In Isaiah 13, they're called the mighty ones, and they're also called the sanctified ones.
Hmm.
Now, this is an end time prophecy. It's talking about the destruction of Babylon, and part of the prophecy of Isaiah 14. But the sanctified ones are angels. And so angels are also described as mighty as well in
Hmm.
Gabor. So these are likely angels. So we want to be careful with that one, not to infer that God has loyal giants that he's going to bring back in the end time. He's got the angels he's using, as Revelation tells us. It makes no sense to. So, but I do think though that we can we ought to make ourselves prepared for giants to show up, not just the descendants, which I think, book 1 and book 2, I make a very good case that they're still running this world. But I think we should expect giants, and to be prepared for that, because to be like the days of Noah, it sort of infers that. And further, they're the ones who caused all the violence, and we're headed for a violence like we've not seen before. So one deduces they may be part of that. And we're going to have ones that come up out of the pit prison, which are the terrible ones in the last 7 years. And that if angels help giants to survive in the earth, off the earth, on the ark, and in any other way, in another dimension, they could have giants here for the end time in that sort of manner. And God would
Hmm.
know that they're going to do that, just as he would have known they would have recreated giants if that's part of the mix, and I suspect that it is as well. So we should anticipate it's going to be like the days of Noah, when the gods walked amongst us. And so all the angels after Revelation 12 are going to be down here. The abyss is going to be open. And when the giants ruled the earth, and the Atlantis kingdom that we covered in the last show was trying to set up world government with the 10 Nephilim kings, of offspring of Poseidon and Clymene, a human female, we should expect something similar for the end time. Now, I make the case that I think the Antichrist has Nephilim bloodlines and Rephaim bloodlines, and that will be part of his pedigree, and will be not only physically descendant and then allegedly back to Jesus and Mary Magdalene. They'll make that case as well. And they'll also utilize their bloodlines of the Quinatar, which is a nebulous bloodline of the Merovingians back to the Nephilim that
Okay.
include the Jesus and Mary Magdalene bloodline, includes another branch from King Saul and another branch from King David that they've intermarried with, which might be possible. The
Hmm.
Jesus and the Mary Magdalene one, not,
Yeah.
but just to be clear on that, that he will have that pedigree that goes back to these gods. And the keepers of this message of the bloodlines, the Knights Templar, um, and as Grail guardians, they worship Baphomet,
Hmm.
which is Baphometer, and this is a mighty angel, Icarus, so a fallen angel. And Mitre is Mithra. This goes back to Indo-Aryan for Mithraism, and Mithra is the god who polytheists will say resurrected like Jesus. Zoroastrian is the branch religion of this, where Mithra is a god, and that this is the religion of the Indo-Aryans.
Interesting.
And December 25 is the birth date of Mithra. Throw some more stuff in there. So be prepared. They're going to have that pedigree. And then he's also going to receive his power from Satan and the dragon. So he may have a couple of avatars working with him in the end time as well. Certainly Satan as an avatar, and we know he can do that. He entered into Judas to give Judas courage. And so he has the ability to live in and share a soul and a body, the Oiketerian, with a human spirit. So expect that's going to be part of it. And Second Thessalonians says he gives them all of his power.
Hmm.
And also expect demons in there as well that he's controlling, because they come out of his mouth at the time of Armageddon. So,
Man. Yeah, that was one thing that I found very intriguing about the differences between angels and demons, because you have demons that are restricted to a purely spiritual form in so much as they're able to then inhabit a body and then puppet it, whereas angels have a dual agency, both corporeal and being able to be spiritual.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And these are the terrible ones that are going to be destroyed. He's part of the terrible ones that are going to be destroyed on a mountain, as Isaiah 25 talks about. And as Ezekiel 32 talks about, the terrible ones are in the pit prison. And Antichrist is somehow connected to the one who comes up out of the prison that kills the two witnesses, as Revelation 17 talks about.
How poetic. How poetic is it that it all started atop a mountain and they get taken out atop a mountain?
Yeah. And Psalms 21:8 through 10 or so talks about removing their fruit and their seed from amongst human in the time of the wrath and God's anger in the end times. So,
man, fireworks are coming, folks. All right, moving right along. Question number 9 from Aitor Navarro, 6597. Was Lucifer's fall before Adam's creation? Was it when Adam and Eve were in Eden? Is Lucifer part of the original 200 fallen angels mentioned in Enoch?
Yeah, a lot of questions in there as well. So
there's a compound one there.
So Lucifer, I would call him Hal-El. I would not use the term Lucifer, even though it's in the KJV Bible. There's also an annotation on the original KJV Bible that the translator said if people object to that translation, we would understand and that they could use their own translation there. Lucifer is the god of the Gnostics and Freemasons. He's the great architect of the universe. And the word is Hal-El, Hal-El Ben-Shakar, Hal-El, son of the morning. So Hal-El, that's one of his names. And he has multiple aspects to him. And yes, I think he rebelled before Eden.
So do I.
And the reason why I say that is that the Nahash, the serpent, which, as you take that back to the Nahash, the source word in Hebrew means like a priest, a necromancer, a sorcerer. This is a being that's walking, talking, intelligent that is also part of the polytheist hegemony and part of the priesthood. This is a reptilian being that is likely bigger than humankind. He's a beast of the field. The beasts were created before Adam is, or before humans are in day 6, maybe up to 1,000 years before, as you have a day is 1,000 years in 2 Peter 3. And that's if people aren't familiar with 2 Peter 3, you need to read that. That is part of a Rosetta Stone of helping to understand prehistory, believe me. But we're not answering that topic. And so obviously the Nahash have already rebelled, but sin hasn't entered the world yet because the law is not there, because Adam hasn't rebelled. But humans would have rebelled. And so again, if people aren't familiar with my work, I think Eden is a separate creation sometime after day 8. We don't know how long, because all the details are different than what is told in Genesis 1. And I don't believe it's just additional information, because the MO of the Bible, when it adds additional information, it's never in contradiction. It adds more information, which isn't inconsistent to what we already received. So I think there's a separation there, and there's 2 creations, and the fallen angels have already converted all of the Nahash beings, whatever else is created amongst those beings, and it's a beast of the field, as it's talked about in Genesis 3. So we know it's a different being, and it had all of these things before the whole species was punished for their participation in the fall in Eden. And so I think that the pantheon was well in place, and the whole world was led astray, but because there was no law, there was no sin that was accounted for until Adam and Eve broke the only law: don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then sin came into the world. So that means that fallen angels had already rebelled before, but again, no law for the physical world. And so if I look at the information that we're being provided, then that Satan sometime, as Ezekiel 28 talks about, as it also talks about him in Eden, was giving his participation in the fall of Adam and Eve, it talks about his widespread trade. of this period of time. We have no idea how long. And he's the one in Edom, but only in his cherubim form, not his seraphic form. He's called it the anointed cherubim there. So Gadriel in the book of Enoch might be his name, because that's the angel in Eden.
Oh, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, it means wall of God in Hebrew, or God's wall, as you take that back into the Hebrew words. And so when we look at that rebellion, it just seems to have happened before that, well before that, might even be before, if there is a gap and there is a renewal of the earth, as Psalms 104 talks about, that rebellion would have happened between Genesis 1:1 and 2. And I think it's a better fit. I'm not dogmatic. I think it's a better fit because it answers 2 Peter 3. 2 Peter 3 is talking about this world in the beginning that was in the water and out of the water that perished. Everybody says, for the most part, in the standard dogma, that's the flood. Well, only the life on the earth, on the land, died, not the life in the sea, and not the whole planet. So the world didn't perish. It didn't die. But if there was this angelic war with angelic technology, they could have destroyed the earth down to its foundations, and then the earth was renewed beginning in Genesis 1:2. When the Holy Spirit is sent, the earth is renewed, as Psalms 104 talks about, in conjunction with the creation of the angels, which is done before creation. So, and in Exodus 20:18, heaven can be understood as not being the outer heavens, because heaven has three definitions. Shemaim, as it's in the Hebrew, it's the place where God lives, it's outside the firmament, and it's what's inside the firmament, and the firmament is called heaven in Genesis 1. So when they recreate the earth to create the firmament, to create life underneath, what's called heaven. So he created that heaven that fits perfectly with Genesis or Exodus 20:18, and that if you had destroyed the world, the waters above would have collapsed onto the waters below, created the chaos, and then you would have to separate those waters, which is the earth that was in the water, that's out of the water, that perished, is being talked about in 2 Peter 3. So I would put it sooner than Eden for all of those reasons and more, but I'll move on. And Satan is talked about in the book of Enoch as being the chief Satan and atop of the watchers. And so he's the one who fell first. As he fell in Isaiah 14, the Hebrew word Nephal, N-P-H-A-L, it's a source word for Nephil or Nephilim. And it means fall. Put the I am plural on, fallen one. And so the fallen angels are the fallen ones. That's where you get that from. They're the Nephilim, the fallen ones of the Shemaim, the heavenly ones. And by extension, they produce their offspring, the Nephilim, and they're going to have some of those traits. And they're also called watchers.
You know, I have to also agree that war in heaven likely took place between that time. That was even a contention that Chuck Missler used to make between those days there. Because when we have Jesus returning in Revelation, his robe is already soaked in the blood of his enemies. And I believe it's the major prophets, I can't remember if it's Isaiah or Jeremiah, that describe part of that battle taking place with Satan and his angels and then the King of Kings.
Yeah. And Jeremiah 4 talks about this destruction of the earth. And I used to think that was just a prophecy for that time. But as I look at that fits an MO of what I call a dual prophecy, where you get interesting information from prehistory. That's important to have. And in this case, the destruction. You get details for the time of the prophet, in this case, Jeremiah and the Nebuchadnezzar period. And there are unfulfilled details for the end time. And all of that is in play in Jeremiah 4. And you can translate was as became. The earth was formless and void. And I won't go into a complete definition of void and formless to say how the world became ruined, but it says the same thing. That's the Hebrew word for was is Haya, the root word for Yahweh, the source word for Yahweh. And it can be translated as became or was.
Do a little word study there, folks. It'll take you on a ride.
It will.
All righty. Next up, our question from JJWJ6UN. What is the ancestry of Druids, and do they have anything to do with the Bible?
Yeah, druids are called serpents, and wisdom is defined throughout the cultures with a serpent, just as the seraphim angels were in charge of government and religion, and most of the watchers that are talked about in the book of Enoch that supplied all of the knowledge were serpents. So there's a sort of direct connection to the priesthood of polytheism to serpents and mystery schools and the knowledge of the serpents. And so when we look at the Druids, these are Celts, and the Celts are understood to be Scythians. Scythians are giants. Scythians are Indo-Aryans. And so Gaul are Indo-Aryans. And the Indo-Aryans from the Scythians, they migrated to England and to Scotland and to Ireland, up the Danube River, into Germany, into Russia, and into Norway. And Sweden and into that area. So the Druids were just an extension of the Indo-Aryan Zoroastrian religion, just changing as the languages and things evolve. So you have their horned god named Cernunnos. Well, that's the same as the Etruscans, also proto Romans, just as Scythians are proto-Greeks. They were the Aboriginals. They have a god in their pantheon called Cern, C-E-R-N. It's from an Indo-Aryan word, C-E-R-N. Indo-Aryan is the language of the giants, and it's defined as a horn-headed god. And that's the Pan god. Odin would be the horn god as well. So you see the sort of similarities. So the Druids are equated in Gnosticism and secret societies as equal to the philosophers of the Greeks, to the priests of Egypt, to the Magi of Sumeria, and the Brahmins of India. They are on par and as old and have the same knowledge and same positions. And so when we look at who these Celts or the Keltoi or the Scythians are, the Tuatha De Danann, the fairy folk, the fairy people, these are known as Paul is doing his ministry into Asia Minor and into Greece as the Galatians. Galatians are the Gauls. Galatians are the Celts. So we get a New Testament reference to who those Indo-Aryans are. So that's really all they are. They are just extensions of migrating giants and their whole history over there is waves of giants from the antediluvian time and then again after the flood.
Far out, far out. Very nice little button there on the end. Love it. Well, rolling right through here, folks. Next question comes from Sleepyhead, 9756. Are those with giant blood damned and without a connection to God, since no one chooses their parentage, and to be cut off from God due to heritage seems not in line with an all-powerful God?
Yeah, I agree with those sentiments. And I know a lot of people believe that the original giants and and some people will believe even the descendants of the giants would be so corrupted that they would really have no choice but to be vile and not choose God. I suppose that's possible. I don't buy into that because it's not consistent with what we're told sort of biblically, that Jesus's sacrifice is greater than all the sins in the world, with one caveat: violations against the Holy Spirit. So creating counterfeit spirits is a violation, and creating giants, tampering with things with life is could be a violation. Taking the mark of the beast, which would have some sort of implication within there somewhere, and I don't have time to go into the detail of it, will send you to the lake of fire to burn forever. You don't suffer the second death. So, and blaspheming the Holy Spirit can also include being a mother goddess, right? Because you're counterfeiting her. because they, as we talked about earlier in that feminine aspect, they believe the Holy Spirit is the female aspect of the godhood, and polytheism is the queen of heaven. So, or in another Sophia. So that's how you willfully choose to rebel and lose your ability to be redeemed, I think. So I think all sentient beings, angelic, human, spirits, offspring of all sorts, have a choice to choose God or not. And if they choose God, that they and Jesus, they would be redeemable, and that Jesus' sacrifice would cover that. That they would have inherited all of these physical traits, and at some point in time, the Xeroxing of the spirit wears out, so that spirit's going to come from heaven anyways. I'll come back to that in a second. That there is a point where if you receive something innocently, you would not be held accountable for that, because you have free choice. It's all about free choice. Everything plays out on earth through free choice. We choose God or not. If we do not choose, you still chose. You didn't choose God, though. And
Yep.
that's the thing. No choice is a choice. And so when we look at even Old Testament law, the sins of the father does not pass on past the third or fourth generation. So even if the first few generations were irredeemable, at some point in time, that Xeroxing of that spirit comes to an end, and the descendants aren't held accountable for it. So pledge to God, pledge to Jesus, pledge to the Holy Spirit.
Yep.
You'll be fine.
I want to say you even covered it in your first book, Genesis 6 Conspiracy, Part 1. And I think it's talked about in one of the books of Enoch, that Noah potentially was witnessing to the giants during that interim period between him being told floods are coming and the boat actually being fully finished, and then the deluge. So I like to imagine that they could have been redeemed as well, but like you had said at the top of this,
why preach to them if they were
irredeemable?
So.
Exactly. I think the Book of Giants mentions that they find out, hey, it's a coming, and then woe is us, essentially. Very good, very good. All right, next up from Lyric and Lore. Okay, related to the old serpent bloodlines here. Once you're a 32nd degree Mason, does that mean that you know the hidden story of our world, all about the Nephilim bloodlines and what their status is today?
I think it depends on how high up you are, how much you know of that. But you are invited to become part of the secret societies. So they're working on genes and bloodlines and records to invite you. Now, you don't know the true secrets until you can become first level adept. You're still mundane to them, and you're not worthy to know the knowledge. But you know you're being invited. And there's a reason for it. You may not be told that reason at this point in time. But as they start to learn their history, and they're told to study certain passages of the Bible, and they're going to be told about the Polychronicon, which is the greater history that they fold the King James Version Bible into. And so I think most of them have a pretty good idea that they are the descendants of the royals. Whether or not they've made the connection that the royals are the kings of God, the spirit's offspring, or the giants, maybe they haven't quite made that sort of connection yet. But a 32nd degree Mason is kind of worthless in the eyes of the adepts, because they're not worthy to know the true knowledge. They're told lies all the way through on the bottom, and they only have to worship a god as part of the requisites to join. They learn who their god is, Satan, at first level of adept, and all other knowledge that will overturn all of their preconceived understanding of things, so to speak. So if you hear about a 32nd degree adept, that's something different than 32nd degree Scottish Rite. It is a pureblood who has been who has been initiated and taught from childbirth. They don't come up through the ranks. So when you see King James being sworn in as a Freemason in some depictions over in England, that's just ceremonial. That has not, he was already way above first level adept. Now, the reason why they're called the 32nd degree adept, it has nothing to do with the Scottish Rite. It has everything to do with the York Rite. And so the thought is that in the old system that starts at 3rd degree when you're adept, that there are 33 degrees in the old system. Just as you take 11 times 3 to get to 33. They're working with numbers. They just split it into 33. So if you were to sort of kind of look at that, you would have 3 times more levels within the old York system. So the equivalent of a Scottish Rite would be 99 degrees or 96 degrees to 32 degrees. And the tradition in the Royals is that you cannot accept adepthood until you're officially an adult, which my understanding is they don't quite go biblically from 20 to sometime to up to 40. But it's sometime after 25 and between 30. So if you're younger than 25, you can't be called an adept yet, even though you're higher.
Wow.
So they call them a 32nd degree adept.
Wow.
Which is accurate, but people have conflated it with the Scottish Rite. And I think part of the reason why they created the Scottish Rite, the 33 degrees for the 3, is that they wanted to get disinformation out there and better hide what they're doing.
Interesting. You answered what I was going to ask. Very, very good. Wow. There's another rabbit hole to go down there, folks. Gary and I did a whole show on secret societies. Well worth a watch there. Tons of fodder for thought. All right. Next up, question 13 from Marla Carroll, 9790. Do those with Rh negative blood descend from the giants? Are they hybrids?
I think there's a good case that they are descended from the giants and in a bloodline. So like the Windsors are O negative, for example. Most of the presidents are negative bloodline. And that goes back to the Plantagenet, King John, and the Plantagenet is a junior offshoot of the Anjou. And so the problem, though, is Rh negative has been added, so to speak, into the mix of human blood, which in this case, by inference, would be Rh positive. So the definition of Rh negative is you're missing the D antigen. So you can't add something that's not there. But that's disinformation or partial information. So it's not the bloodline, it's the gene. And so the gens of the Plantagenet is the Plantagenista, the Plantagens. And just as the Elven gens is the fairy gens or the gene of Isis, or getting down to specific bloodlines, you're into the Elby gens of the north in England, and you have like the Julia gens of the black nobility of Italy that goes back to Ares, who is the father of Romulus and Remus, Zeus and the Herculides Gyges kings. That's the Cretazens from the word Crete, where Zeus spent a lot of time. It's the gene that passes on the ability to produce the blood type. That's what's added, is the gene. And it's thought to pass through the matriarchal bloodline, which is why the gene of Isis, which is the Queen of Heaven female, which is the fairy gens as in a fairy queen female, and the elven bloodline of the Tuatha Danann is same as fairy, it's elf, and jointly coming from an occult source, and the Alaphim, which are the dukes plural or Alaph singular of Edom that we talked about earlier. I won't go through all of that again. So it's the gene that was added, and it can skip a generation as well. So it seems
Interesting.
to be that's how it's added in, and they track it through the bloodlines and through the matriarchal bloodline. And Rh negative blood, has different traits for people um, who have it. That is done in many. There's hundreds and hundreds of research out there on noted abilities of Rh negative blood. So I just group the commonalities as you get through several of them. So higher IQ, plus 135, better analytical skills,
Hmm.
better intuitive abilities, more psychic abilities, and more encounters with aliens, demons, and things like that. Lower body temperature, lower blood pressure, higher percentages of blonde and red hair, better vision, increased sensitivity to light, like Dracula and the vampire allegory, and Vlad the Impaler. Subject to more alien abductions and unexplained phenomena. And here's one that was really curious. They never said why they believe this, that the people with Rh negative blood cannot be cloned. This is what's in the surveys.
Interesting.
Yeah, very strange indeed. So I think the Rh negative is the gene that comes from the gene that is of the Royales, and they believe that they're superior people. They believe they're the offspring of the gods.
Far out. Ooh. So then I guess would that in a certain sense make them hybrids?
Well, they had to intermarry to survive because of that female issue. So they'd intermarry with humans, even though they try and keep those bloodlines as pure as possible. So you're bringing in that hybrid line. Absolutely.
Got you. Well, that makes sense. Excellent. Oh, just a few more left here, folks, before we jump to lightning round, I guess. Question 14 from Abide All Day 8969. What do you know about the angels in Revelation 9:14 through 15 who are bound in the great river Euphrates?
Yeah, it's crazy. And we don't get an explanation for it.
Yeah, I know. Frustrating.
And they're reserved there for a specific period of time. And it's an odd number, 4. So what's going on? My speculation, that's all I can do for this, is understand there's 4 sides to the throne of God. And Enoch has part of the top 7 angels, the book of Enoch, also whittled down to a 4 number. And likely to head the rank and the order on all 4 sides. So an archangel would be sitting atop, representing the 4 hierarchies that I talk about in book 2. And you also have the 4 winds that come out in Zechariah 6 with chariots. And it's the same allegory and imagery. They come from the throne of God. So these are angels of God. And you have the 4 riders in Revelation 6 that come from the throne of God. 4. So everything in the rebellious side is a counterfeit. They copy everything, the hierarchy. And so you have these 4 angels that are going to be released at the time of the Gog War, Joel 1 and 2 War, and Revelation 9 War. And they're chained at the Euphrates River, obviously to bring great destruction. Now, the 4 winds of prophecy are also talked about in the end time. And 4 winds of prophecy bring about the beast empires. And they're talked about in Daniel 7 as stirring up the beast empires out of the sea. And 4 winds is used in other places, usually for prophecy. So then you have these 4 archangels, it seems, loyal ones, that are also the winds of prophecy, and probably the 4 riders that are going to be introducing the last 7 years. And then you have the 4 nemesis angels, fallen ones, chained, prison there. And that's when a third of the destruction of the world is going to be done. It's not Armageddon, because it would be all flesh if it was at Armageddon when they're being released at this point in time. Doesn't mean they're not going to be part of the Armageddon destruction, because they're still going to be here. And so I think these are the counterfeit organizational structure of the 4 right-hand men of Satan and of the 7 Satans that the book of Enoch talks about.
Wow. There's there's an anime called Evangelion, and very, very heavily influenced by Christianity and Catholicism as well, in terms of the way that the storyline is structured. And there's sort of this extra biblical story tied into creation and then the eventual end of the world. But the writer for that show, he has these 4 main beings inside the show, called Evangelions. They're like these giant, they look like mechs. You find out later on in the show that they're both human and machine composed together. And in the lore that he created himself for it, he describes them as the barons of hell. And that sort of, these seems to be in a similar vein as, you know, these 4 captains that Satan would have at his disposal during that time.
Yep.
Very, very interesting stuff. And oh man, I wonder too, because you have Abaddon or Apollyon also, when he lets loose that bottomless pit, like is he sort of in concert with them? Is he in that same rank? I mean, he's holding back all of hell essentially.
Well, yeah. So if you're going to release everything from the pit prison, these ones may be where the pit prison may be located in another dimension below, but they're at the Euphrates River. But they're chained, so they're all being released. But there's one angel that opens up the pit with a key, and then you have these ones being released as a separate event within the same passage.
I have to wonder if they were part of the destroying angels that rode out during that first Passover through Egypt. Very interesting fodder for thought.
Yeah.
All righty. Question 15 coming at you, folks. From Gene 2B22. Could family curses come from having any ancestry of giants or Nephilim?
Well, not curses. From a genealogical perspective, but certainly more interaction with the demons, wanted or unwanted. And there are demons that would have been enemies of their bloodline. So you have, as we understand today in the physical world, white hats and black hats running this. You have the same rivalries throughout history: good Nephilim, evil Nephilim, black magic, white magic, evil witches, good witches, and on and on and on. So you could have these rivals being transgenerational that would, and if you had a demon haunting you, you feel like you're cursed.
Sure.
And of the bloodline, they have more of these type of encounters. So
one, I think specifically from a lot of the research that's been done in alien abduction, they also seem to be more frequently visited by the Greys.
yes.
All right, last one.
Yeah,
the little people. Oh gosh. All right, last but certainly not least, from Tipster. Are the elites trying to follow scripture, or was scripture showing what the elites will do? Was the trumpet or shofar possibly a frequency weapon used to quake the walls of Jericho, and now an unnatural frequency weapon is used to cause earthquakes and or other cataclysmic events that are weather related?
Yeah, so a very, very good question. So the elites, they want the rendezvous with destiny. They want the end time. They want that showdown. They want to win their freedom. They've been deceived that they can win, and they're trying to bring it on. The problem is there's an ordained time. So try as they will, it doesn't happen until the ordained time. So they are trying to get there. They're not necessarily trying to fulfill all prophecy, but they want to get to the parts that they would like to and get to that sort of showdown. So yes, they are receiving, and as we go, angelic technology as well, just as the Nazis did, in terms of creating their technology very rapidly with the jet engine, the rocket engine, single plane, tiger tanks, this bell-shaped thing, and on and on and on. And we're catching up to the technology that was before the flood. So they would have sound technology as part of angelic technology. They have the ability to destroy the world by fire. And I think they did before the flood, which is why the flood comes, because that destruction by fire is reserved for the end time, as guess what? 2 Peter 3 talks about again. Very important passage for people to land. So to understand. And so sure, they would have that technology that would be as strong or similar in kind of strength to what is being applied at Jericho. Now you have the ark there as well that could be amplifying the sound of the blowing of the trumps, but it's clearly a sound wave technology, and that they're trying to create this type of technology and angelic technology and things that would have been used before the flood and maybe even again shortly after the flood that has been lost. So yes, there is a distinct possibility that they can use this to bring about cataclysmic events and other technology. And maybe there's technology to control the weather. Certainly, even in the book of Enoch, and certainly also in polytheist accounts, angels are assigned to specific aspects of the weather, like storm gods, for example. And so I think that they're bringing about the birth pangs as contrived or created within the earth catastrophes, and that they'll continue until we get to the last 7 years and about the timing of the opening of the seals, and that will still continue, and that destruction will get stronger. So I have a link. I can't post it on Facebook because it's considered news, and Facebook doesn't allow Canadians to put news on.
Gosh.
But it's talking, I have it, and it's a clip, and people want to get a hold of me, I'll send you the link. I just can't put it on social media. But Brennan, in I think it's 2019, is talking about their ability in the CIA to control weather patterns, and how this technology is very powerful, but also politically tenuous, because you could cause the demise of a nation by controlling its weather. And so they're trying to work through how to use this technology. And this is done at I think it's either at the UN or like the Council of Foreign Relations or somewhere else where he's giving this speech. It's absolutely amazing. And everybody's saying that you can't control the weather. Well, they're saying they can.
Wow. Yeah, it makes with just the frequency concept alone and the sound concept makes you wonder about the naming of HARP, the way it was.
Yeah, those acronyms are created for a purpose. I mean, CERN.
Yep. Nothing was without reason.
The horn god, the pan god.
Well, and when you look at their dedication of essentially their mega tunnel, that whole very bizarre hours-long ritual that took place there, where a guy is dressed like a satyr at one point there. Very odd stuff. If again, folks, truth is stranger than fiction, and they're telling you exactly what they're doing. Just pay attention. Oh, excellent. Oh my gosh, this has been so much fun, and we have 7 minutes left.
We can do more questions.
We could try and take on a couple more over here. There's been some good ones throughout the course of this talk here. We'll just start taking them from the top. Let's see. This is probably gonna be an easy one here from Coco. Nice. Gary, is it safe to say that individuals with blonde or red hair have the DNA of the Nephilim? There is no judgment here. I'm just curious.
Not necessarily, because we had those hair descriptions that were with us before. So there is a distinction. It's like pale skin. But the paleness of the Nephilim skin was at a whole different level. And then there's different kinds of red hair, and it's the strawberry blonde red hair that is the most favored within the royales. And so the whitest of the blonde hair is more favored as well amongst it. So I'd say there's strains within the strains. So red might be an indication that there might be some genes there, but not necessarily. And red is considered higher, at least from the Western bloodlines, as a higher majestic bloodline and gene than the blonde.
Interesting. This next one we sort of covered here. I don't know if you have any other information on it. Kevin Kennedy TMI asks, Gary, can you please explain to me what the aliens greys are?
Yeah, they're the gray gnomes of the fairies.
Very succinct.
They're called the Greys. The gnomes are called the Greys. The Grey neighbors in Scotland. Exact same description, exact same technology. They're just a term that was used before our technology came along and the alien deception. So now we're getting the language to deceive a nation that is developing the knowledge.
Very, very succinct. All right. Oh, here we go. From JR. If you get a chance tonight, I would love to know what Gary thinks the catacombs of Paris are really about. I know it's off topic.
Yeah, that's something that, I mean, Paris is technically not one of the ancient cities, but an old city. And it is a city of the Anjou. And in the secret societies, in the occult world, underground cities, underground tunnels is part of that whole mix. So when they set up the town square in North America, which is even newer, they would have knock off the 4 cardinal points, which is very important to them. And so they would have like a Masonic hall on one end of the north, let's say, and maybe a courthouse or something on the back end, and 2 churches on each of the sides, typically a Catholic church and a Protestant church. And that within that is the town square. And then they would have tunnels with all sorts of chambers and places to do rituals and stuff like that underneath. They did that in all of the old cities as well in Europe. And places like Petra are more underground than above ground, just as some of the many other cities around the world. So this underground nature, I think, comes out of their history of protection, maybe to survive the flood, to survive danger or war. And what's interesting in Revelation 6, when the destruction is 25% only, all the great men, the mega and the megastranes, and meg is Indo-Aryan for ruler or king, and means big, large, like a giant.
Megatron.
Yeah, which is the word that's used for great and mighty men in the book of Revelation, are the 2 words that are used for that as the bloodlines of these giants. They all are running for fear into their caves. I'm thinking underground fortifications, whether they're bomb shelters, whatever the fortification, for protection, because they think it's Armageddon. They're saying this is the day of the Lord, and they're running into those caverns, but it's not the day of the Lord yet. It's going to get worse still. So, yeah, I think that's what they use them for.
Very good. Well, I think that's gonna about do it for us tonight, folks. Gary, this has been, again, so much fun. I want to thank you very much for taking time out of your schedule to come join us. It's always a pleasure, sir.
Yeah, it was fun. So I just love to answer questions and different questions. And anytime I can do live questions or get questions submitted from the audience, just love to do it, because people have so many questions, and whether or not people 100% agree with everything I say or not, that's not the point. I'm just trying to connect dots for people and supply some information. But I think what happens is that people start getting some answers and some places to look a little harder at things. And instead of just saying like, well, church never talks to me about any of this questions I have, and nobody has these answers. And it's important to understand, because what I'm trying to do is show a pattern of how the Bible operates, but that the Bible is sent as a message for believers in a world that has counterfeit patterns of the same thing.
Very well said. Well, folks, head on over to Genesis6conspiracy.com. Gary has some very, very generous excerpts of both his books up on there that it just serves to whet the palate, as it were, because the books themselves are gargantuan. This is no quick weekend read there. Mine, I've got so many little tabs and stuff marked up inside here, and the second one is just about the same size. there are a number of different buying options if you're interested in purchasing one. We have everything from signed copies. If you want to buy multiple books, if you want to get one for friends for Christmas, consider doing so. You can also pop on over to Amazon there, where you can find Gary's book, Genesis Conspiracy 1 or number 2. Right now, number 2 is for $24.63 at 30% off right now, folks. If you're on Prime, dive on this deal right now.
And
You will be-
also available in Kindle version. And you can link
Excellent.
over from the website. And also the Audible version is out for book 1 for people who want the audio version. And we're hoping and praying for the narrator. He's had some health issues, but starting the project again for book 2. Still hoping to have that out before Christmas, and getting good reviews on book 1 on the Audible and the narrator. And I will have links up for both from the website as well. They'll go right over. So on Audible, Amazon Audible, and iTunes.
Awesome. Well, do you have any speaking engagements coming up or anything that you'd like to plug?
I have some conferences I'm working on, but no firm dates yet, or no firm commitments to those dates. With conferences and things like that, they have to get speakers lined up, and then they have to try and figure out how they're going to at least break even on it. And so
Sure.
you never really confirmed until a few months before. So as we get closer to them, I'll get that information out for next year.
Very good. Well, folks, thank you again so much for tuning in this evening. I hope that it was entertaining for you. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned a thing or two. And I hope you take up the Berean challenge seriously. Born of Acts 17:11, the Berean challenge says, don't just take anything that my guest or I say as the 100% truth. Instead, you are empowered and encouraged to do your own digging. You will be rewarded for the effort and enriched for the toil. Till next time, folks, have an amazing day and an even better weekend. God bless.